So let's look at the various options along here. Under the Edit, Undo and Redo, obviously. Insert Point has been simply, I've been pressing Insert on the keyboard, but you can select any parameter or set of parameters and hit Insert and it'll create a new keyframe for you. A Neutral Point will add in a point of default setting. So in this case, the default is 0. So you could use this to make sure that your first frames are neutral, for example, in a picture move, so it doesn't offset, it doesn't jump, that sort of thing. I'm pressing Undo to get rid of that. The difference between Remove Point and Remove Selected is that Remove Point will only remove the keyframe from the current frame that you're parked on of the group that you've selected, whereas Remove Selected will remove every point that is currently selected. And in fact, that's the function that occurs when you press the Delete button. Clipboard. When we were copying earlier using Control-C and Control-V, strictly speaking, we were doing a copy curve and paste selected. In other words, we were doing a multiple copy that copied an entire animation. Copy frame, on the other hand, will copy a particular value from a particular parameter and on a particular frame. So for example, here if I park on frame 8 and go copy frame, then wherever I go, if I were to press paste, it would insert that value on that parameter. It won't transfer it to other parameters. Under folder, we have the ability to add and remove folders and so on. This isn't relevant for many effects. It's not relevant for the effect we're looking at now. But for example, in the compositing node, it's how you add layers. You actually add folders and each folder becomes a layer. Likewise, the light is very specific to the 3D comp. And of course, we can duplicate folder settings and remove them. Propagate is a method of sending your parameters to multiple clips on the timeline. So let's try this. We'll go back to the timeline. I'll just add on 2 more solids, but in fact, let's put them in a line as if they're different edits, perhaps. So we can see, if we just look on our mini monitor down here, that this is the clip we were working on. It's got animation, and this is now black, and this is black because we haven't given it any settings as yet. So what we can do using the propagate is if I were to select this clip, which is the one with our animation in it, so we go to the propagate menu, the first thing we need to say is what actually we want to propagate. So in this case I could select everything, but I could also select individual parameters to propagate to other effects. So using the option All Clips, what this will do is send those parameters to every other identical effect on the timeline. So in this case, it would find all the solid effects and send these parameters to them. Now obviously there's an element of danger if you want to send one set of parameters to everything on your timeline. So All Clips does come with a warning. Do you really want to do that? Yes, I do. So now when I go back to the timeline, I can see that this has the animation, so does this, and so does this, because they've all inherited that curve. Now if I just undo that, so they don't have them anymore, they're now back to black. And let's look at the propagate to selected effects. Well, in the same way, I select which parameters I want, but in this instance it would only send those parameters to other similar effects that are selected on the timeline. Now this means that we have to select them in a particular order, because of course, as you can appreciate, if this was the last one I selected, well then the parameters that are here are for that particular effect, which in this case has no animation. So if I wanted to send the parameters just to this one, not to that one, from this one, I just make sure that the clip that I select, that is the source of the parameters, is the last one I select. So now when I go back to the parameters, I can simply select the parameters I want to send and go to selected clips. So now when I go back to the timeline, we can see that this has got the data, this hasn't, and this has. So we use the propagate clips to send data from one effect to another. Particularly useful, for example, to send the same crop settings to all the crops on the timeline, that sort of thing. Under math, this is one for the manual, but you can type in various expressions here. For example, if I were to type in rand 100, it will generate a random number between 0 and 100 to go into the red, because that's what I've got selected, evaluate. And if we look on the curves for that, we can see I've got a random flash going on. There are quite a few things you can type in here. The manual gives you a full list of syntax, and in fact there are some examples there. Setup allows you to apply some limitations to how you can move things. So for example, at the moment I can freely move that keyframe wherever I want, or of course I can strain it in X so it can only go up and down, or in Y so it maintains the same value, just changes time. Limit X and Y basically means that this doesn't let me drag a keyframe before 0 or after the end of the clip, but there are occasions when sometimes I'd want to, if I'm picking up an animation from a previous clip, so in which case I can disable that and it will actually allow me to go off limits if I need to. Snap X means that when you start dragging a value around, it will always jump to the nearest whole frame. And auto key is a repeat of this function here. The current frame here is both a readout and you can type into it to jump to a specific frame. And then we have some various functions to work with the graph itself. So let's just clear down what we had, and again just let's go back to making a simple animation. So under points we have some control about what type of keyframes we have in place. The default position is that they're smooth curve keyframes, so long as they're followed by a keyframe. As you can see, this one goes sharp when there's no more information afterwards. We can change keyframes to be smooth, which is its default, sharp, smooth tangents, which basically means you have a tangent that's matched on either side, it's always a mirror image, or sharp tangents, which allows you to break one side or the other. These tangents don't pull out, they're of uniform length. Constant keyframes allow you to make steps rather than animations between values. So for example, let's delete this and add in a value and make it a constant keyframe. Then go to a different place, add in a keyframe, also make that constant. You can see that the constants hold a value rather than animate down between the values. Just going to press undo to go back to our curve. So under the curve menu, we can hide, which is what we were doing earlier with just by pressing H, a particular parameter, or reveal it. We can reverse a curve. We can also flip a curve, which turns it upside down. You can see in this instance the curve hasn't continued because in this particular scenario we can't go negative on a color field, but in fact the curve is still there, we can just drag it up. But as you can see, flip has turned the curve upside down as opposed to reverse, which reverses it in time. Let's put it back. Fit will do a fit to fill between the length of your current animation and the full length of the shot. So as you can see, at the moment my keyframe is not on the last frame. So if I wanted to fit to fill this curve, I could just do this. As you can see now, the curve is expanded out. Filter, on the other hand, gives you a keyframe on every single frame of the shot. So if you know you want to do a lot of frame by frame animation, then this is a good starting point. Just undo to get rid of that. Flat tangents work with keyframes that have already been set to a smooth tangent and allow you to start from a neutral base to do soft starts and soft ends and that sort of thing. So for example, if I select this last keyframe here and just under points put it to a smooth tangent, you can see that naturally the tangent is heading towards the previous keyframe. On the other hand, if I go to curve and flat tangents, you can see it flattens the tangent, as it says, allowing me to do a nice soft start, soft end. Block allows for the duplication and moving of sections of curves. So select this area, duplicate. I now have those keyframes duplicated. Again, undo to go back. Block move will move a selection of points to the current frame. Time allows jumping around the time within the graph. Again, all these have shortcut keys that you're perhaps more likely to use. Scale allows you to change the size of the curve itself, whereas these scales are just changing the display. This scale will actually change the values in the curve. So for a curve that we selected, scale H, scale V, actually these aren't scales as such, they're just offsets. So just to move the entire curve horizontally or vertically. These scales relate to a selected area and a selected box. So for example, if I drew a selection box like this, scale left is holding the keyframes on the right side of my box in the same place, but then proportionally scaling everything that's closer to the left. Let me add in a couple of other keyframes just to make that more obvious. So again, I'll select this area. The keyframes close to the right edge don't move, and the ones that are closer to the left move proportionally. Likewise, scale right does the opposite way. Same for scale up. Again, relative to the bottom of the selection box, and scale down relative to the top of the selection box. The last scale is an absolute vertical scale from 0, so it doesn't pay any attention to the selection box. Over here is a max button, so you can maximize that display if you need to get into some more detail. And something we didn't discuss was the in and out keyframes here. These are actually designed for creating animation curves that are specific to dynamic grades and color grading. So we'll cover that in a color grading session. And while we're up here, if we have a curve selected that has keyframes, the keyframes are noted in green here. And in fact, by control and dragging, you can drag a keyframe along visually on this line. Likewise, you can delete a keyframe, and you can use the shuttle controls to jump between keyframes. So that's a good tour of the parameters editor. Again, the text manual will go into a lot more detail on many points.